So like I said before, treat it like a normal interview. It is virtual. It can be taxing. It can be difficult to communicate over a computer, and not all, your message will not always be received. You may not think it's always received, but to the best of your ability, make sure that you're still treating this like a normal interview. Preparing yourself, dressing appropriately, asking questions, giving eye contact as best you can, depending on, sometimes you're looking at the screen versus the camera, but looking at the person at least so they can tell they're looking at you. Not multitasking, that is extremely important. Do not do anything else while you're on your virtual interview. If the person's asking you a question or if they're giving you information about the company, you should be attentive and paying attention. You should not be checking your email. You should not be checking your phone. You should not be on Facebook or whatever else. And it's very easy to do those things, but don't do them. Make sure you're blocking out that time for yourself, because again, in an in-person interview, you would not be on your phone. You would not be checking other things. You would not be calling someone. Excuse me. So it's really important that you mimic that behavior in the virtual space. One thing that I've learned recently and been thinking about recently with interviews and with just virtual meetings in general is that body language and emotion are not communicated the same way when we're behind a computer screen than if we are in person, right? So if I'm sitting with somebody at a coffee shop, or I'm sitting with somebody in an office and we're talking and we're conducting an interview, I can probably read their body language. I can read how their expression is towards me. I can understand in bits and pieces how they're receiving my answers, or how, maybe I, as the interviewee, need to change certain answers or need to lean in or lean back or adjust myself depending on the situation. The same way as the interviewer, I can tell if this person is excited about the position. I can tell if they're kind of telling the truth, or if they're struggling through some of the questions, if they're nervous. Not all that easily translates through video, right, through the virtual space. So we have to really just do the best we can to be as attentive as possible and make sure that we're paying attention to the person in front of us, and even expressing maybe a little bit more than we would in an in-person situation. So if you're somebody who uses their hands, and I tend to use my hands for things a lot, I'm not saying you should go crazy and use your hands even more than you would, or that you should do anything that you wouldn't necessarily, but don't rely on that to be something that communicates your message, because as I'm doing these motions and things, the person may not even see it. Like, they may not even see what I'm doing with my hands, so that message I'm trying to communicate is not going to be as clear as if we were sitting next to each other. So recognize that and make sure that your voice, your eyesight, your posture, everything else is communicating how you feel and what you want to express in that virtual interview, as opposed to relying on the things that you maybe have in the past. And yes, a note on here too, keep your camera on. It is, and we'll get into this a little bit later about the when you're working in virtual meetings, but your camera being on in virtual interviews, in my opinion, is required. You have to have it. For one, otherwise, if your camera is not on and you're meeting virtually, then it would just be a phone interview. There's no reason for you to be sitting there talking to somebody with your camera off and just talking over the computer. You could just call them on the phone. So if they've requested an actual virtual interview and their camera is on, your camera should be on. If their camera is off, your camera should still be on. Number one, because you want, like I said before, you want to make sure that you're expressing what you want to express and who you are through that camera. So they will have no idea how you feel, what you're saying, what you're doing if your camera's off. And they could think any number of things, and that you're not paying attention, you're not interested, you don't care about the position. And when none of those things may be true, you may just be having a bad day. But you really want to get yourself into a place where you're comfortable putting that camera on, because that's the only way they're really going to be able to connect with you virtually. And the last thing I mentioned in the preparation section as well, making sure that you have a phone number or an email address to follow up with during the interview. So if anything goes wrong, if you get disconnected or your microphone goes out or something like that, you can email your interviewer, and you can call someone to say, this is what happened. Can I either reschedule or can we continue over the phone? And I would definitely give that information before the interview. So if you're talking to somebody in HR or whomever you're speaking with who's scheduling that interview, make sure you ask them what that contact information is, so that you have it ready to go once the interview begins. My advice is to just do your best to look at the camera so that you are looking at the person. I don't think there's a hard and fast requirement on it either way. It's more natural, of course, to look at the screen because you're actually looking at someone. And most likely the person on the other side will probably be looking at the screen too and go back and forth between the camera and the screen. I think the most important thing is that you're just providing eyesight, so you don't have to be staring at the camera the entire time, but make sure you just look at it every now and then as you give your answers, so they know that you're attentive and that you're looking at them. And when you're listening, when they're saying something, maybe you look at the computer screen to look at them and see what they're saying. But it's definitely a balance. I wouldn't stress about going back and forth or making sure you're holding your eye contact on the camera, because it's just difficult to do, and we naturally want to look at people when we're talking to them.
Another question is about writing notes during the interview. Is that something that you would think is a good idea, or it's the multitasking thing?
Yes, good question. So I think it is a good idea. If you're going to do that, just let the person know at the beginning that you will be taking notes. I would advise writing them down. If you're going to type them, definitely make sure that you tell someone that you're going to type notes, because otherwise it could look like you're texting someone, you're messaging someone, you're doing whatever else. And in general, I just don't want to give the perception that I am doing something else. So I would rather just get a notebook out and write things down so they can see that I'm taking notes on this interview and I'm focused on it, as opposed to typing something which may then open me up to getting distracted by whatever may pop up on my computer screen.
Or also the noise of the clicking,
Exactly.
Could be distracting. And then I just wanted to point out that Andre from our office had a little tip about disabling the HD video, just to help with the bandwidth. So you can look at the chat for more explanation on that. And I think we're caught up for now. I know Paula has a question, but I'm going to ask that one later. So thank you.
Perfect. And thank you, Andre, for that point. So I think that's a great point. And really just, I think going back to the preparation piece, knowing your machine and knowing what technology you have, so that if you do need to make adjustments like that, so disabling the HD or doing something else, making sure that the sound is coming out of the right speaker, you do all that beforehand, before the interview starts.
Make sure to check out the My Career tab on the BC Navigator app, where you can track your career progress based on the amount of credits you've earned, stay updated on upcoming events from the Magner Center, and watch our videos for insight and advice on your career field.